You had this idea, Caroline.
Yes, and my idea is about political debates and how we can improve political debate. So you'll often hear it said, particularly at the moment, that we need to debate something. But rarely do we get a good debate. We get people arguing and locked into oppositional positions. So we have an adversarial system of debating and nothing comes of that, and it's actually hard to listen to it. So lots of people are completely switched off by the political debates that happen. And my idea was, how could we improve this? How could we make it bearable? And how could we actually build something constructive? And I'm thinking we can use this time talk method to do it. So that's what we're going to demonstrate. So we're going to consider a particular question, and that is going to be, how can we use the thinking environment to improve political debate?
Sounds good.
Do you want to say anything about the method?
No, I think you carry on if you want to.
Yeah, so we're going to have a strict amount of time each way. There is a boundary around that, 2 minutes each, 5 goes. And no interrupting if you're not the person talking. Okay, so timer please. And Shirley, I'll ask you the question first. How can we improve political debate with thinking environment?
Oh, it's so difficult because when people disagree with me, and I'm not even going to be contentious and say what views they might have, because often I do. I think the first thing that's got to be in there is respect, because I find it very difficult sometimes to respect people who think differently to how I think, and that is not going to work. That's just going to be bad. And also what sometimes happens to me when somebody's explaining their view to me, they're saying it as if it's the only right way. And when they do that, my heart starts to beat because the challenge starts to build itself up in my brain. Whereas if they were saying it as if maybe they think it's right, but it might not be right, I might find that easier to listen to. And I could take that advice for myself to just say, well, to me it makes sense that it works like this. So why do you think it makes sense in a different way? And to be genuinely curious. Because I just think I want to be right. And I find some perspectives impossible to tolerate. I've got to change that. So I need to genuinely think that other ways of thinking could work, and could work well for the greatest number of society. So I'd have to look at them when they're speaking to me and think, well, how would this work for the greatest number of society? And why would that work any better than another way? Mm-hmm. Sure, that's 2 minutes. No, gosh. So what else? I think that at the tone of our speaking, when we're convinced of an idea, I think we need to be a lot more humble how we put over our ideas. That's then going to encourage the person to be gentle with you. But I also want to know that people have got their facts right.
Okay.
What do you think?
Well, the thing that really pisses me off about debating in the media is interviewers having a go at politicians and trying to catch them out. So you hear this very aggressive style of interviewing, and it makes it very difficult then to be uncertain about anything. If you can't be uncertain about things, how can you investigate ideas and come up with new solutions? So I would like to see a system of talking about this in the media that isn't about trying to catch people out, but it's about actually exploring an idea and enabling people to think things through, because that's what this is about. It's a process where we build. So you can disagree with somebody's view, but you have to give them the time to have their view. And we know from our experience that it's not nearly so stressful then, because you know you're going to have your turn to have your view. So it may be that if we could practice this over time, if people could practice this as a way of having political debates, they wouldn't feel so instantly defensive as is the case now. Because once you've gone in the defensive mode, you can't listen to what anyone says, and you can't be interested in another point of view. You've got your position, which might be the party line, and you've got to toe that. But what are the politicians there for and the interviewers? They're running the country, they're affecting the communities that we live in. So it comes also for me down to a grassroots thing of what do we actually want where we live? What do we value about our community? What do we value about healthcare or opportunities or education? If we could know that and get that clear in our minds, we'd be much better placed to engage our politicians and say, this is what we want you to deliver. So.
I like that point you made there about what do we value, and I think that we've almost got so used to taking whatever we can get, because whatever's given, it seems. And the thing that I feel is most missing is information. So how does the education system work? What is it delivering at the end of the day? You know, how many young people are satisfied with their learning and going into something that they find satisfying? So if you take, for example, the Finland example on what they do with education, they've shown that happy kids from an early age make better decisions and learn better later on in life, and that they shouldn't have any exams until they're like probably 16 or something, and that they get a love of learning for its own sake. But there's data on that exists, and of course I will latch onto that data because it really suits what I think. Maybe there's other data that from Japan or something that says you've got to be disciplined and learn by rote. So where do I get good information from so that I can argue my case not from a point of view of wanting to believe something, but saying this seems to work? What would stop us from trying this, from experimenting with this? What would stop us from generating our own data? It's like currently there's lots of experiments on the universal income, universal basic income. But those experiments have been done. Nobody's paying attention to the data that already exists. And that just makes me cross because it's wasted. So where do I get good data from? And when good data is derived, how do we make sure society knows about it and politicians know about it so that we can make better decisions? And maybe even if the data doesn't work, but we say, actually, we care about sick people, we care about people who are vulnerable, maybe that's the thing that we're prepared to pay for. So regardless of, well, that may cost our society a lot, maybe we don't care. What do you think?
I'm interested in what you said there about the problem of information and data. There's something about this method that opens things up. So we start with a question, and the question stimulates our thinking. So rather than saying we are going to think about political debates, we've actually asked how could we improve it, and the difference that makes to how we can then think through. So rather than saying, you know, let's talk about the education system, if you ask the question, how can we improve the education system? Suddenly the imperative to look for some information is there. So the information part of the thinking environment that you need enough to think well is actually triggered by the question, because in a situation like in the political environment where you are thinking about lots of systems like health or education, roads or transport, you do need a lot of information, and that is really difficult. And you need a system that allows you to look at conflicting things without being this is right, but to say maybe this is right. And this way of looking at things allows that, facilitates that. Wouldn't it be great if Parliament ran on thinking environment lines? Imagine, instead of going across the floor, they sat in a circle and everyone had a turn and they thought in pairs. And they had to appreciate each other as well. That would be good. So I think it's the kind of thing, though, also we know from our experience of the kind of opposition there is to trying this out, that it builds over time. So people will need time. Imagine if you rolled it out countrywide tomorrow, how long it would take for people to let go of their defensiveness.
Yes, I mean, culture is something that can be changed in a second, in a minute or two, if you have enough control. So, like to get people to do things like, I don't know, it can change quite quickly, day or two maybe, to get people used to listening. And I'd be curious to talk to the people who've been learning thinking environment with me today and tomorrow. I'd be curious to ask you tomorrow how natural it feels tomorrow as opposed to how it feels today, because you've just had that bit more time on it. I think it's maybe already happening. But and so what I thought was interesting when you said, well, about what are the questions we could ask? So what do we care about? How do we look after the sick? How do we have a prosperous life for the largest number of people? How do we have a happy population? How do we have a beautiful education system that sends people out as good citizens, not just as consumers? How do we help people be the best person that they want to be? So it is about the questions, and then just say, let's not take a left or right view. Let's just see how we solve that, how we achieve that goal. Because I bet you when we start asking these questions, we agree more than we disagree. So everyone having a fulfilled life, who's going to disagree with that? Oh no, I want those people to have a sad life. No one's going to say that. They're going to say, yeah, the highest number of people on the planet having a good life. How do we do it? Yeah. So the questions seem good, and then a lack of dogma. So it's and maybe starting with things that are practical, but never losing our vision for something that's amazing, really marvelous and wonderful. Five, four, three, two. Did it. Your turn.
So my third go, I think. So
what do you think? How can we make political debates better?
Yeah, good to get back to the question. And I really like this idea of going back to basics. So in some ways bypassing the politics, the party politics side of it. Because all of that stuff is about our society and how we're going to live and how we're going to live well. So the party system is really a red herring. The questions are, how will we be happy? How will the most number of people prosper? How will we look after our environment? How will we not blow ourselves up? How will we stay well? How will we be safe when we get old and be looked after? How do we value people who can't earn loads of money or work slavish hours? So the questions are really important, and I'd like to see a kind of wave of questions like this being asked by people all over the country. Sit down and find someone and firstly start with what you like about where you live, and secondly, how could we improve it? So you start with a really open question, and then you might find that you focus on a particular area that affects you. Because that's the other problem, is there are so many things to think about. And if you try to inform yourself about education and health and transport, it'd be a full-time job. You shouldn't have to be a university researcher to have a view on how your society should work, how your community should be. So I guess also picking something that you feel drawn to, that affects you, because there'll be other areas that other people are drawn to. So I know a bit about transport and cycling, so I've got some views about that. And I also know about the arts, and I've got views about those things.
Well, I agree with what you said, that the amount of information you might need to make an informed choice becomes overwhelming, and I think it disengages people. There's lots of evidence that people don't have a view about the economy because they think they don't understand it, or they think it's so simplistic, it's like a household budget. So getting good information is very important, and maybe choosing something that you really care about, like you said there, that you think, well, it's not going to be a study course, or I'm not going to be a researcher, but I'm going to be fascinated with this one subject, and really try to understand the levers and the how this works as a subject, and just say one thing will be enough. Understanding something about the environment, or something about the economy, or something about health, that's your thing. The impact of art on a society would be a lovely subject. I think they all in the end will overlap, but that it doesn't become a chore, becomes a pleasure. to participate as a citizen because it's important to you. So if it's education, how do we have the most amazing education that generates happy people? If you're worried about peace, what's more likely to result in peace? And I think our adversarial style of conversation leads to war, because somebody's got to be right and somebody's got to be wrong, and then at a certain point, or maybe it's greed, or I don't know, but I don't know, how do you just nip war in the bud and just say, oh, come on, there's surely enough for everybody, on this planet, there's surely enough for everybody, and how do we make that happen? It just seems so unlikely. But wouldn't it be great to be asking those questions and being listened to? Because we've got no chance of answering if we're not asking the question. We've got no chance of generating decent discussion. And if politics is about the people and how we improve things.
So I was really interested in what you said there about following things that are of interest to you. And I think that very personally specific way of approaching it is actually enormously relevant. And you can get enthused about that, but you can also be the person who knows, and then you can see how you contribute to your community, because you'll have other people in your community who are looking into different things to you. You don't have to know about everything. You don't have to be informed about everything. There's a tremendous pressure to feel informed as your duty as a citizen. And I'm often criticised for not reading the papers or watching the news much. But actually that's highly selective. It represents little strange snippets of information that don't add up to a story.
Yeah.
It doesn't inform you well. But it's an easy way of looking as though you're being a good citizen. It actually takes a more creative approach to think, what are my problems today in my community, and where does that fit in with wider society? So making a living as an artist. Artists are people who break boundaries. Breaking boundaries is a really important thing, to know when to do it, to move society forward. So they have a role, so we should look after them in our society. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to value that? So something that's a very personal issue for me does actually have enormous relevance beyond me. About how we might fund the arts, how we might actually promote creative activity for all people. So I think we should get a movement going. I'd like a viral movement of people making these films with your friends, pick a topic, find something that interests you, have 5 minutes each way, 2 minutes each, 5 goes, and see what you can generate with that.
A global conversation. And just going back to the bits that fascinate you, because I really like to know how things work. So like the economy. This is fascinating to me. I'm not educated in this area, but I've understood it pretty well. I've got a good grip on now how finances work, how the weirdnesses of it work, and what we think. And what we've got is these various assumptions about how things work, which are not true. And I think these are dangerous. These are like misinformation by accident, perhaps. Let's be generous and say by accident. But they are dangerous. So like, for example, a lot of people think that if you work hard, you will do well. Well, sometimes. I mean, okay, if you're a lazy thingamabob, you probably won't do well, but you could be lucky. But if you work hard, you also need luck. You also need infrastructure. You also need some people who know you, who trust you, are going to give you a go. You need a system to give you an interview. So you need a lot around you. That's more than just your hard work. Hard work is important, but it's not everything. And luck is too big a factor in our commercial society. And I would love more people to recognise the amount of luck that they've had in their lives that's led them to be able to. So someone who even might feel disadvantaged but has got an amazing skill because they learnt it at school, because they happen to live in a particular area where that was on the curriculum. The luck is a big bit, but we persuade ourselves, and this is the conversation I want us to look at what cannot be what are our limiting assumptions about the world? Are we assuming that only the deserving are well off? And how do we prove that? And if it's unprovable, why wouldn't we just assume something a bit more positive, a bit more generous?
So this is my last go. I like this idea about what might we be assuming, and we may all be assuming that actually we can't influence a political debate, that there's too much to know. The economists can't understand the economy, so how can we? There may even be a kind of, I don't like the idea of a conspiracy, but the structure of professionalism that makes us feel we can't engage. Politics is very much a profession now. Doesn't feel like a thing that ordinary people could go and do. It's a group of people. There's very much an us and them feeling about it. So yeah, let's challenge the assumptions that are holding us back from having these debates. And then people assume it doesn't make any difference anyway. If enough of us do, it will. Because we'll get clear about what we want. And we have to live with an economic system that supports what we do. We've got a right to have something that we can understand, that works for us. It's not good enough to be patted on the head and be told, oh, well, you have to be an expert. That's not a good enough excuse. And that's true for any of the things. So, we have the perfect tool to explore and challenge the assumptions around that. And I would really like to see that happen. So I think we could come up with some very exciting questions that could get people going. What would you like to see in your community? Starting with recognising what is good. I think that matters, because the other problem is we can go from the idea that everything is wrong and it has to be all sorted out. And that's another disabling feeling, isn't it? So it is good to acknowledge what's going well in the community where you live, what works well about your experience of the health system, or what's good about the transport you have.
Thank you. So just to finish, Caroline, what would you like to see happen next?
I would like lots of people to watch this, share it, and look at the notes we're going to put with it. Ask questions, find somebody and ask them a good question. Pick one off the list or make a new one, and do this timed talk. See what it generates for you. Have fun doing it. You don't have to film it well. And share it. Share them all about, and let's get a decent conversation going all over the world